scene of a battlefield. There is no other way to describe it. There are still many injured people here. The faces I'm looking at are just of sheer exhaustion, of fear, of panic. I've spoken to 2 doctors. They counted 7 dead bodies yesterday. So I'm looking at one man now who's walking towards me. His entire garments are bloodied, have blood stains across them. The man next to him has some sort of eye patch covering his eye. It is really difficult to look around without seeing someone with some sort of injury.
Later in the day, Egypt's Ministry of Health reports 13 dead and 1,200 injured.
Once the sun had come up, I left the mosque to come outside and see what was the new reality. There were so many weary and wounded people. They were laying on the grass, laying on the pavement. There were a lot of wounded people still with bandages around their head. People were wearing head protection, saucepans and plastic bottles, anything that could give them some kind of protection. It just felt like the morning after a war.
Pitched battles continue in the side streets around Liberation Square. But the feeling in the square itself is that the pro-democracy protesters have stood their ground.
The minute the dawn came, the minute the light came up, everybody was very, very happy. Everybody was smiling. I think you can hear some chanting and some songs being broadcasted on the PA system. People are very happy that they have survived the night. They think they have been victorious.
There is still huge resistance here. The chants are still going, Thawra, Thawra, hatta al-Nasr, revolution, revolution, until victory.
There's increasing evidence now that the so-called pro-Mubarak demonstrators are in fact policemen and paid thugs.
One of the metro stations here in Tahrir Square has been transformed into a makeshift holding cell where the pro-democracy demonstrators have put people in them who were involved in the violence. And those people, one of them have shown me the ID card, which clearly shows that they belong to the state police.
A lot of people's, who captured some of these pro-Mubarak supporters then later confessed that they were paid or given, a few dollars here and there to come and agitate the protesters.
And a lot of the times they were handing these people who they'd arrested over to the military.
Now it appears to be the opposition demonstrators who appear to have the upper ground. They have advanced. They've taken over 2 flyovers which lead towards the bridge.
Sorry, when you say opposition demonstrators, do you mean those opposing the government or those opposing the government?
Anti-government demonstrators. They were using almost like medieval battleground techniques, using pieces of corrugated iron as shields, literally pushing forward.
So far, the army has done nothing to protect the anti-government protesters.
The army just pretty much seemed to melt away, and they just stood back and watched it happen. It was quite shocking.
They were not willing to try and stop this fight. And I think everybody was pretty shocked and pretty disappointed. But as for anger being shown towards the military, I didn't really see any of that, but that's probably because any attempt to show any animosity towards the military would only create a weakness in the battle itself.
In a way, it would have been difficult. Who would the army have fired on? Because the protesters were so mixed up at that stage.
Now, finally, it acts to separate the 2 sides. President Mubarak's government denies any part in the violence. It blames foreign spies and international media.
What you don't want as a journalist is to become part of the story. You want to report the story, but the government, the authorities, almost made us actors in this drama. They accused us of inciting the violence. So it was very difficult for us. Not only was there the general insecurity on the streets, but also the sense that we were being targeted ourselves.
pictures of an Israeli passport put up. Foreigners were described as saboteurs, they were described as armed, some of them, and that they were trying to destabilize the state.
The mood on the street shifts to fear and anger at anyone who looks like a foreigner.
And we ended up in this fairly large square. I haven't a clue where it was, with a very large crowd there, chanting and pushing towards the cars. There were people with sticks, people with machetes, and then it was escalated. People were climbing on the car. I saw at the corner of my eye at this armoured personnel carrier, thankfully, and soldiers were getting out of that, and they were firing live shots over the heads of these people. We were pushed into the back of this armoured personnel carrier, and we were then handed over to the secret police. And then we were pushed into a bus, and the mood had changed dramatically at that point, because the bus moved forward, and the crowds were bashing against the windows of the bus. About half an hour later, we realized there were other journalists, every nationality you could think of. Not only that, humanitarian aid workers, doctors, business people. They basically orchestrated a huge campaign to pull in foreigners and to convince the general public that this was wholly an international plot.
We condemn in the strongest terms attacks on reporters covering the ongoing situation in Egypt.
Egypt's government is forced to apologize.
I apologize through all the media channels. I apologized through all the TV channels that I spoke with today. I apologized as a man who accepts responsibility.
The government offers another concession.
The president said, I will not nominate myself for presidency in the next elections, and therefore no one from his family will run. Neither the president nor his son will run.
Hosni Mubarak is determined to stay in power until his term ends in September.
He still does control the economy, he still does control the security forces, and he has very good relations with the army. The system has not abandoned him, and that's how he managed to survive.
Calm returns to Liberation Square. The army tightly controls entry points and keeps Mubarak supporters out. Inside, protesters are as defiant as their president.
The day of departure. The anti-Mubarak camp wants the biggest demonstration yet. The army has already moved into place. They say this is to keep both sides apart.
The government tries a new tactic. Egypt's new defense minister visits Liberation Square and pleads with protesters to go home. The numbers in Liberation Square keep rising. It's now a city within a city.
Tahrir Square itself, that half-kilometre, is a living, breathing example of real democracy. The fact that you see people from different